Good afternoon, everyone. We do want to thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for the Turning Around Low-Performing Schools with Significant American Indian Student Populations. We are the South Central Comprehensive Center at the University of Oklahoma, serving as today's host as part of the Cross-Center Indian Education Collaborative that's focused on moving research into practice in Indian country. This is the second webinar in our webinar series. And I'll take just a moment to introduce today's presenters and facilitators, and I'll start with myself down in the bottom right-hand corner. I am Carrie White, the South Central Comprehensive Center, Arkansas and Louisiana Technical Assistance Coordinator. I have with me today Belinda Bisco, who is the South Central Comprehensive Center's Director and also Associate Vice President for Outreach at the University of Oklahoma. We have joining us by distance, Cindy Hackney, Superintendent of Anadarko Public Schools, William Robinson, the Executive Director of the Darden Curry Partnership for Leaders in Education at the University of Virginia, David Sullivan, who's the Indian Education Program Director with Anadarko Public Schools, and Jacob Sotai with the South Central Comprehensive Center Indian Education Technical Assistance Coordinator. So we do want to welcome all of you and ask that you would share with us who you are. And we'll do that a couple of different ways. So first of all, I am going to open the poll. So you should be able to see now on your polling pane an opportunity to select whether you are representing a state education agency, regional comprehensive center, content center, regional education lab, a local education agency, district, or parish, or if you're from a school site. Oh, and I just realized I hit the wrong poll. No wonder you all weren't responding. I've opened up the poll for the end of the presentation, which you have not yet had an opportunity to see. So I apologize. This is what happens when someone like me who thinks that they are technological tries to do something new with technology. Now this poll should be the correct one for you to tell us what type of organization you represent. So if you would take just a quick second and respond about who you are and what role you're playing today. Looks like we have a couple of people who haven't yet responded, but those of you who have are all representing regional comprehensive centers. If you are from an organization other than those listed, please mark the other and tell us in the chat box who you are representing. So thank you again for your participation, letting us know who you are. I do want to remind you that the chat box is available for you to ask questions or provide comments throughout the presentation. We encourage you to share with us your thoughts and experiences. So at this time, I'm going to introduce Dr. Belinda Bisco, who is going to tell you a little bit about the Cross-Center Indian Education Collaborative.
Well, good afternoon, and it's really a delight to have all of you join us of what we think will be an exciting and interesting presentation around school improvement and turning around a district with participation from the Anadarko Public School District here in Oklahoma, a district that we love and know quite a bit about. So we're very excited about having Anadarko in partnership with the University of Virginia Darden-Curry partnership, a part of this presentation. Let me welcome all of you who have joined us this afternoon. So just in terms of a little bit of context, there are, as you can see, 5 comprehensive centers and 1 content comprehensive center, 5 regional centers and 1 content center, all of whom have received funding from the National Advisory Council for Indian Education, affectionately referred to as NACE. And with the additional funding that we have all received, we are putting some special emphasis on American Indian education because of the significant population of American Indian students we all have in our region. Aside from the fact that we're all engaged in individual work in our region, we collectively came together as a collaborative to say, wouldn't it be nice to focus on some few issues as a collective group of centers that are working in some collective areas. And so therein the birth of our Cross-Center Indian Education Collaborative. One of the things this year that we decided might be of interest to us, to the districts and schools that we work with, is this whole notion of moving research into practice in Indian country. One of the things that the research tells us is that despite the fact that American Indian education issues are some of the most researched in education, this is also one of the areas where very little of that research really moves into practice. So one of the things we're trying to do recently with these webinars is focus on some emerging best practices that are showing great promise in terms of improving teaching and learning in Indian country. So the purpose of this presentation today, we had a summit some few months ago that the West Comprehensive Center hosted. We brought together teams from all of our regions, and there were 2 areas that emerged of interest across our regional teams in terms of focus of our collaborative work. One area was effective teachers and leaders, and the other area was turning around low-performing schools. And so it is out of that initial summit that where the West Comprehensive Center hosted all of us, that we decided we would do a deeper dive into these areas. So some of you are on the webinar 3 or 4 weeks ago, and now this is the second in a series of 2 webinars.
And this
the webinar today has the main purpose of presenting one district's successful experience in turning around low-performing schools in their district where there is a significant population of American students. The superintendent in this district is also quick to let everyone know that all does mean all for them. And while this district has a significant number of American Indian students, it is a very diverse district, and they have tried to make sure in their research and best practices that they are also meeting the needs of all students. I think you will find it interesting, though, that they, in their turnaround efforts, have put a special role and focus on the Indian education coordinator's role, and I'm really anxious for you to hear about how they have uniquely expanded his role in this work. As someone who had responsibility when I was in a large urban district for many federal programs, including Johnson O'Malley and Indian education, I know that in the past the roles of those programs was pretty siloed and narrow. So we do think it is an emerging best practice that the superintendent and the leadership in Anadarko are viewing the lens of Indian education in a much more significant way in terms of its role in supporting the community, teaching, and learning. So we're excited about that emerging, what we think is the best practice. We'd like to have some discussion from those of you who are on the call about whether similar or different approaches may be going on in districts or schools and states that you're working with as well. In terms of outcomes for this, we hope with the work that the Anadarko Public School District has been involved in with the University of Virginia Darton Curry School of Business, that we'll all walk away understanding what some of the key components of this work with Turnaround have been and how it has really significantly impacted teaching and learning. We also hope that participants on the call today will walk away with a deeper understanding of how they have adapted and expanded the role of the Indian Education Coordinator to support teaching and learning in some more expanded and different ways. We also hope that by the end of this webinar that light bulbs have gone off for folks on the call and that you're able to take and apply some of the key components of Turnaround as are discussed on the call, and how these can be used not only in supporting districts that may have a significant population of American Indian students, but that you also see the relevance of this work and its benefit to all students in a district. And so with that, I am going to say welcome. It's my pleasure now to introduce our first speaker, William Robinson, who is the Executive Director of the University of Virginia Partnership for Leaders in Education. I feel like William is a major partner and a part of our team because so many of our states are engaged in the turnaround work with the University of Virginia. So I'm going to zip my lips and turn it over to William at this point, and thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you to Dr. Biscoe and to Dr. White for the invitation to be part of this conversation. It's an exciting one because when you get to hear Anadarko's story, not only will you hear great passion, great will about what it takes for all students to achieve and what it takes for us to set up conditions where American Indian populations will thrive sustainably, but you'll see leaders who are taking their passion, their will, their knowledge, and they're channeling it in sustainably productive ways by taking a systemic approach to turnaround. And that's in this just brief, less than 10 minutes I'm going to have right now. I want to just, if I make any point at all, it's that in all of our years of working with Turnaround, and we've been working on Turnaround for 12 years with over 80 school districts in 16 states across the country, our number one lesson is that for Turnaround to be successful and sustainable, it must be a systemic approach. And it starts with school system leaders being willing to rethink their practice about how they're establishing conditions for Turnaround to thrive. The first slide in front of you is really just a slide that's meant to say school turnaround can happen anywhere. What you have there is a representation of rural areas, mid-sized areas, urban areas, small states, large states, high schools, middle schools, elementary schools. Not listed there include places we've worked, such as White River, Arizona, serving a majority Apache population, and Laguna Acoma in New Mexico. Schools that serve schools that didn't have as impressive gains as the results right up there, but that had gains in the 15-point range just in a couple of years. So in terms of what does Turnaround take on the next slide, you've heard my introduction about it starts with a systemic approach. But it's also a recognition that, school turnaround is not meant to be the federal definition of school turnaround or something that's mandated. It's more of a mindset. It's a mindset that our school is not where it needs to be. Our community, we're not serving our community well enough, and therefore tweaking around the edges is not going to be successful. School Improvement Plus is not going to be successful. Just implementing what we're already doing more effectively with more fidelity is not going to be successful. We need to be willing to fundamentally rethink how we're approaching school, what practices we're prioritizing, and that's going to result in a fundamental disruption of practice. And it starts, again, with system leaders and school leaders looking in the mirror saying, what can we do differently? And everything I just said can sound scary, but that's where it's the role of leadership to do everything I just said in an inspiring way, in a way that provides a clear pathway, and in a manner that provides stakeholders with confidence that leaders are learning from what's working and what's not and making adjustments along the way. And that's where this learning-focused leadership with a continuous improvement mindset is so key, because if we're going to fundamentally disrupt practice, it's not because we think we have all the answers, it's because we're going to work with our stakeholders on generating those answers as we urgently drive for better results. I was asked to give an overview about how we at the University of Virginia approach our partnerships with systems. I share these with you not as a endorsement or marketing of our program, but hoping that you'll see some themes and some lessons learned that are transferable for however your entities are supporting your partners. So for us, again, it starts with a systemic approach, being key to ownership. School leadership is tremendously important. We work with our partners to not only make sure that they're selecting leaders who have the will and have the competencies to drive the work, but increasingly our definition of school leadership is quite broad, and it includes how are we ensuring that there's strong leadership teams that are moving to work at the district and at the school level, which is something that Anadarko has worked hard on as well. But ultimately, sustained change is not about establishing the conditions and getting out of the way. Sustained change requires partnership, roll up your sleeves, ongoing support, and accountability. Anadarko will speak about that. We hold our partners to a high bar, and that's what we think good partners do for one another in turnaround. In terms of our key activities driving our support, it really starts with rethinking what's possible. When we formed partnerships, we had the privilege a couple of years ago of visiting Anadarko and getting to spend a significant amount of time with their district leaders, with their school principals, to understand what was working, what was not working. And at the end of that, we provided a summary about what we thought needed to improve based on the evidence. But more importantly, we were having a conversation about what were they willing to change on behalf of students and on behalf of the communities, and what was going to take for that to be successful, and how can we help them. We call that a district readiness assessment, and ultimately we're not assessing whether or not everything that needs to be in place for students and for schools is in place. We're assessing where are they in getting those things in place, and what is their will to be partners in urgently getting those systems in place. And that sets the stage. If we do find partners like we were lucky enough in Anadarko to find who are willing to make the changes necessary, we're their partners in rethinking those system conditions during a planning year. But ultimately, just getting the conditions in place is not enough. You have to reignite the leadership leading the change. Through our program, we're fortunate enough to work with professors of organizational effectiveness and change at the University of Virginia who are excellent at helping leaders reflect on what they can do better, find solutions to their challenges within their context, and really inspire them through understanding how change has been led in organizations both outside of K-12 and in K-12 across the country. And that reigniting of leaders' passion and inspiring them with ideas, and doing it together in a cohort where district leaders, school leaders are working together and working across districts is something that we think is necessary to keep the leaders doing this hard work fueled. Ultimately, they use that fuel to redesign their efforts. We support them with that through visits, through tailored support, et cetera. The main thing I want to highlight under redesign is action planning. Schools in turnaround and schools in American Indian programs often make these long school improvement plans that cover everything on this under the sun that needs to improve, and then it goes under a shelf and it's not really used to drive the work. What we want to do is work with our partners to create short-term action plans that identify focused strategic priorities that most need to be addressed at the school level, that they can hit grand slams in, and then move on to the next focused strategic priorities. Ultimately, our goal, as this call is a great testament of, is not just to see improvement in the set of schools we're working with, but to use lessons learned from those schools to transform practice across districts, across states, across other partners. When we say a systemic approach, on the next slide, what we're referring to is what are the conditions across school systems that you can see in our graphic, the conditions of leadership, talent, management, support and accountability, instructional infrastructure. All those work together to grow leaders, and not just grow principal leaders, but grow teacher leaders, grow student leaders. That's what this work is about. A greater definition of the levers is on the next page, but ultimately those are just a high-level summary. The real work is working with leaders to figure out what's it going to take in the leadership lever to inspire and align change. What's going to take in the support and accountability lever to ensure schools and districts are working together with communities to co-create success versus having it be either just top-down or bottom-up. Under instructional infrastructure, what are we doing to make sure teachers have the tools that they need to understand curriculum, understand their data, and drive change with it? And talent management, what are we doing to ultimately not only recruit our workforce, but more importantly, build our workforce to do work on behalf of students? This is just a summary of the work that's required at a system level for work to sustain, for turnaround to happen. Of course, the real work happens ultimately at the classroom level, at the school level, and there's a lot of research and experience on what that work takes, and Anadarko will speak about that some, about those leadership actions and those instructional practices. But we're here to argue that unless a district is committed to change and committing those conditions needed for success, a lot of those practices at the ground level will just be in pockets versus as a system that's driving learning across all of the schools. And so my concluding slide to you, so the final one that talks about how ultimately those system conditions, along with turnaround leadership competencies, leaders who are growing their ability to impact and influence change, alongside actions that those leaders are taking that the research shows are important for improving instruction, improving engagement, are what drive turnaround. And with that summary, be excited for a conversation either now or later after Anadarko presents, and I'll leave that up to Carrie.
William, thank you so much for that overview. Before we get to specific opportunity for you to ask questions of William, I would like to get your thinking about those 4 system levers And which one do you find to be most challenging for district and school leaders with whom you work? So again, we've opened a poll, give you an opportunity to respond to which of those 4 system levers do you find challenging? And then the second question, why do you think that is? So we'll give you just a quick opportunity to respond to those 2 questions. And once you've responded, if you do have specific questions for William, you can either press *6 to unmute your line and ask those questions over the phone, or you can go ahead and go into the chat box and type your questions or any comments that you might have to share with the group as a response to what you heard from William. We'll wait just a moment. There are a few of you who are in the process of responding, so we'll give you an opportunity to complete your response. It looks like almost everyone is finished. Just a few more seconds. And I know some of you may be writing some responses in the chat box, so feel free to continue to do that. But we'll go ahead and close out the response poll so we can take a look at those results.
This is Jacob Sotai. I'd like to say if you're on the teleconference and are not able to upload the webinar, I had to resend the link. The original one we sent out was not working. So if you're on the webinar, on the teleconference, you can now click on the link that I send to join the meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jacob. So for those of you who are on the webinar and were able to respond to that poll, we have 3 that have said one of the most challenging areas for school and district leaders is the differentiated support, 2 that commented on leadership, and 2 on talent management. I very much appreciate that varied approach, that varied perspective on what the greatest challenges are. So we do know that the challenges are going to be different in every district and school. So that's interesting that we are finding those challenges to vary from across the districts. So thank you very much for that. We have had a couple of comments that have come in on the chat feature. So for those of you who are on the call but not on the webinar and aren't yet able to see that comment, Heather Hope shared that the issue of building capacity of leaders to become instructional leaders is one that can be a challenge in the states in her area, the North Central Comprehensive Center states, because of the rural context. And I think a lot of our building leaders over the past years have been focused on management of a building and not as much on instruction. So a lot of our leaders, not only building, but also district level leaders, struggle with being truly instructional leaders. But I agree, Heather, that the rural nature of some of our schools makes it even more difficult in terms of building that capacity. Continue to feel free to chat in your questions, but I do want to pause just very quickly if there is anyone that has a question if you're not on the webinar portion, if you're just on the phone and you want to hit *6 to unmute your line and ask a question or give a comment. So not hearing any questions right now, I would like to introduce Cindy Hackney and David Sullivan from Anadarko Public Schools here in Oklahoma. And we are passing off the technology tool. So Cindy, you have control now of the webinar. Feel free to click through those slides. And we do, again, want to thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule as superintendent of the school district to talk about the importance that you and your district have placed on the Turnaround Initiative. Cindy and David, take it away.
Thank you, Carrie. I, too, would like to echo William's appreciation of your asking us, Dr. Biscoe, and you, Dr. White, asking us to participate in this. We're still a little bit overwhelmed sometimes that people want to showcase our district. So, and I would just say that we did our own slides, and so if they look a little bit elementary compared to everybody else's, I'll apologize for that up front. But if everybody's ready to go with us, I've got my Indian Education Director, David Sullivan, here with me, and at any point in time, if anyone has any questions, or we seem to be going through the material too quickly, or we could provide more clarification, we are more than willing to do that and willing to share our email and phone numbers if anyone wants to contact us that way at the end too. So without further ado, we presented this at our state leadership conference and at the State Board of Education here in Oklahoma, and called it Leadership at the District Level. And so that's what our whole PowerPoint is based on. So there are a lot of slides here at the beginning about change, and David and I just had this conversation a little bit ago that one of the biggest things with this process when we were asked if we wanted to go through this partnership with the University of Virginia has to do with change and how difficult the change process itself is, and it is all about organizational change. So when you see the oh my goodness up there, it was like I knew we needed to change, but goodness, it was going to be some challenging and difficult work. And this next slide, simply by Leo Tolstoy, says everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself. And I've been in education for 30-plus years, and I found that that's very true even today. So here's our story. Currently, we have about 1,932 students. We have 5 sites. We're a little bit unique in that we're a district-wide feeder pattern. We have K-1 at one building, 2nd and 3rd grade at the other building, pre-K and 4th and 5th at our other elementary school, a traditional middle school of 6 through 8, and a high school 9 through 12. I have approximately 243 staff members. You can see there our student population is 62% Native American, 4% African American, 18% Hispanic, and 16% Caucasian. Our free and reduced lunch rate, and this is district-wide, is 81%. Our elementaries run right at 92% free and reduced lunch, all 3 elementary schools. That last bullet that you'll see there, we were in Class 3A, and then they bumped us up to Class 4A, and we've won just about every state championship or runner-up in almost every OSSAA event that you can imagine. So we're very well known across the state for our athletic prowess. So I'd like for you to remember this towards the end of the presentation, but that's just a little bit about Anadarko, Oklahoma, that's in the southwest quadrant of Oklahoma. So honestly, what I hope you learned today is that what we're doing is nothing radically new or different from what you already know about education and turnaround work. However, it is a way of thinking about how you do business and figuring out a way to do it in just bolder and deeper. So these are books I've kept in my office since I was a principal and assistant principal and assistant superintendent. And the reason I put the front and back of the book, if you're riding a dead horse and it dies, get off, is because we had been riding a lot of dead horses and hadn't seen fit to get off of them yet, but finally we did. And the other book in the bottom left-hand corner is Change is Good, You Go First. It's hard to initiate change and to be the one to start the change. And the last one there, You Can't Send a Duck to Eagle School. We found through this process that some people aren't always up to the work, and you can't make an eagle out of a duck. And here's some more books that I have in my office, and really what we found is every book that you read about education anymore is all about change. So the message is, very simply, this is what we were. I don't want anyone to think that we haven't gone through a massive amount of change, systemic change across the district. But when you look at that bridge, and I just explained to you about our feeder pattern system of being a K1, a 2, 3, a 4, 5 in the elementary levels, when you look at that bridge there, it's collapsed. And there was an element missing in the middle of the bridge. That is very apropos for where we were in our district 3 years ago. We've gone from a collapsed bridge. Basically, we aren't a complete jet engine, but when you look at this slide and you see the synergy of all parts on an airplane have to work together, that's what we strive for every day, bringing this system together. So I have learned a lot from my mistakes, and I'm thinking about making a few more because I just know that I'm going to anyway, so I might as well be ready for it. This slide here, the 5 tiny islands adrift in a vast sea, we have 5 sites. It's no one person's fault. Everybody here has always worked hard. We just didn't have any systems in place. Having been a principal at the pre-K 4th, 5th Center for many, many years in this district, I knew I was one of those little islands out floating about. So here's what this is all about. It's about a system in the making. Williams talked about that throughout his whole presentation this afternoon. I want you to understand that there is no silver bullet. There's no magic program I'm going to talk about, and I mean this sincerely. We have been from coast to coast across this great country and back again with every kind of training you can imagine, every resource purchase that anybody ever wanted, but we've not ever found a silver bullet or a magic program. And I want you to know that last bullet there is very profound. Turnaround is very hard, but it's also very rewarding work. And, you know, we've been at the bottom. Oklahoma has what they call a grading system for the state. Every site and every district gets an A through F grade. And so we've been at the very bottom. And when you're at the very bottom, you get lots of offers coming your way. We've been given the Voyager Reading Program K-5, and it's been great for us. We got Think Through Math in 6th through 8th grade. Everyone has had good intentions and think they have a program. Remember when I talked about that silver bullet? To offer that's going to help you turn the corner. But we had lots of things and lots of resources and lots of training before the University of Virginia came along, and Dr. White and some others at the State Department saw that we had something possibly that could work in the University of Virginia turnaround. So we're very grateful that we were chosen to participate in this. So these are just the 4 system levers that William talked about, but I want you to know that they're all equally important, and if you're struggling with one or another, David and I sit here and we perfectly understand. We have been there too, but the processes we go through requires us to really look at each one of the 4 system levers and how the work is what the work is going to look like. So here's where we started, and William talked a little bit about this also. The beginning of a system. They came here in January 3 years ago, the University of Virginia did, after we agreed to go through this process, and did that readiness assessment. And I can tell you, and I've told my principals and everybody else, it made me physically sick because being a brand new superintendent, although I'd been here in the district for 30 plus years, thinking, oh goodness, they're going to come do a readiness assessment, and it's all about whether the district and leadership has the capacity to do this turnaround work, and if we don't pass this readiness assessment, that's going to make me look really, really bad. So I thought I knew what we needed to do, and I knew for an absolute fact I could not do it by myself. So I started thinking about all the resources that we have here in the district, and when I talk about resources, I mean people as well. And knowing that I was going to be the district shepherd for this process, it just seemed like natural to me. David, our Indian Education Director, has always come to all of our principals meetings. We now call them district PLC meetings. He'd always been here, but he never played a great big role in it. And he's invaluable. You know, the majority of our students here are Native American, and he runs the Indian Education Program. It just seemed to me that it was natural that he be involved in this. The other person that works very closely with us is our Special Services Director. And between the three of us, we're the leadership team that oversees this whole process. But it just seemed natural to me that David be a part of this because the majority of our students are Native American, and he knows the system, he knows the people, he knows the community, he was raised here, and he's just been a tremendous help to me throughout this whole process because I could not have done it by myself. So we did go through a boot camp. We did put in place an instructional coach in every building, and that has really turned out really well. They support the teachers and the principal both. Not everyone's able to do that. What you're going to see here are some things that we've made work with what we have. We've not gotten any extra money except for the process of University of Virginia itself, the training. We do 90-day action plans, and we have defined the roles for every stakeholder you can think of, whether it's the community, the parents, the students, the principals, the teachers, all of us. We all have a role and responsibility. We've come up with what we call the Warrior Way. We are the Anadarko Warriors. That is our mascot. David's going to talk a little bit later on that, on what the Warrior Way means, but it's kind of given us something to hold on to. It's almost our mantra. We've got a very dedicated group of people that have helped us do this, and we took our district administrators through summer training, and that was the beginning of how all of this started. So the systems that we have now in place, and I've told Carrie and I've told everybody else that's ever asked me to present our story, that it's hard to do almost 3 years of work justice in a 45-minute breakout session or an hour-long webinar. So I'm going to hit the high points here, and I hope we welcome any kind of question that any of you might have. So if there's anything here that we don't make clear, please feel free to ask. So we're all about data-driven instruction. Everything we do goes down to the classroom, and whether it's a common assessment, but everything is based on the standards that we're expected to teach by the state of Oklahoma. We also have district and site PLC guidelines, professional learning community guidelines. We no longer have meetings where we just come, because we used to have meetings where all we did was come and do housekeeping things. We don't do that anymore. It is all about the professional learning. We now have a district and site assessment calendars. We require 3 district benchmarks a year district-wide. Even the pre-K does it in some form or fashion. And we have an assessment calendar that goes out across the district into the community so everyone knows that it's a non-negotiable. This is when our assessments are. We also have the luxury. We have Power School Student Information System. We have a SchoolNet assessment software for our common and district benchmarks that we can do K through 12, and that's how the teachers do common assessments, and we also do our district benchmarks. All of it's done online. We also in our calendar, and I want you to know all these things I'm talking about are not things we've done before. These are all things we've learned through the process and the partnership with the University of Virginia. Our official school calendar has 5 early release days where we let the kids go at noon and all of our staff stays, and we disaggregate the data from either our literacy assessments or our district benchmarks. And one of the biggest things that has helped us the most is that last bullet there. The principals all do a 90-day action plan. Teachers do 6-week action plans based on the benchmarks that we do. And our students now also do reflection and goal setting, and it's all based on data. So we also have RTI, response to intervention, and every single site, all 5 of them, are required to have that embedded in their master schedule, and everyone will tell you that it's very hard to do at the secondary level, but our middle school and high school principals have made this work, and we'd be glad to share any of that with you. We also now have a talent management plan. That's one of those levers that I know some of you said you had difficulty with. We've never had a talent management plan. We have one now, and the arrows that are below that bullet there show you what's included in our talent management plan. We're actually in the process of revising it for this year with our 5 instructional coaches and our district leadership team. But we have what we call a tiered teacher support. You've heard about RTI for kids, tiers 1, 2, and 3. We've done that with our teachers. They're all on level tiers of support because we have such a teacher shortage here. We don't have the luxury of not rehiring someone unless we absolutely find some major problem with them. So we're trying to do everything we can to support from within. We have a new teacher induction program that we've never done before this year. Our principals have a support system from me and David and our special services director, and all of our PD is aligned to our goals. And most of it is provided by in-district experts. We do not go outside of the district anymore unless it has something to do with our University of Virginia training or part of our district or site goals. We have a evaluation system for our teachers. We use PD 360, our principal evaluation. It's all on software, and the principals have 90-day action plans that match up with their goals within the McCrell principal evaluation. So we've tried to make everything fit together so that this system with the University of Virginia, the partnership, fits into everything that we do. William also mentioned the behavior event interview process. We go through all of that where we give scenarios and people tell us how they would react. That's how we interview people for jobs now. We're developing leaders from within. All but one of our instructional coaches have a master's degree in administration, so we're hopeful that when principals retire or leave the district, we'll have people ready to step up and take their places. We've really focused this year on having teacher leaders in every building, and I'm proud to say we have 2 college degree paraprofessionals that are going to actually be teaching in our district this next year. Another major piece is David, as the Indian Ed director, my special services director, and I go out every week, and we call ourselves the district shepherd team, and we visit the sites, and we assess progress, provide feedback, and feedback in written form and verbal form, and to just simply give encouragement. But we're out every single week, whether it's to visit classrooms, looking at interventions, or to just simply give support. And again, that takes a lot of time, but in order to turn things around and get systems in place, you have to know what's happening out in the buildings. And this slide here is simply that whenever I go out in the district, that's kind of the joke, is that the tiger's in the jungle. And so we have some good laughs about that one. Here's a scatter plot of data, of our state testing data, and as you can see, the heavy blue line is 2014. If there's 2 stars out by the year, that means that that's the best in 5 years. You can see that for the most part, the heavy blue line is spread out. We fully expect, I made the principals predict what they thought their state test scores were going to be. Our state testing window opens this Friday, and based on our benchmarks, which very well mimic the state test, we stand to really by far exceed in every grade level and subject area of where we've been. So we're extremely proud of where we've come from where we've been, because you can see we had some really low test scores. So here's some facts about our data and everything that I've been talking about. We still have a lot of work to do, especially in our K through 8 math. Fidelity to our programs is key. We continue to focus on that every single day. It's been such a learning process for all of us in so many ways. I'll go back to all those change slides. Some people have left us because they didn't have the heart for the work or they didn't have the heart for our children. We've made some great gains in a lot of areas and some small gains in others, and we talk about this every week too. We celebrate. we actually have the principals go around every week and talk about the boosters, the good things that are going on in their buildings from week to week. Our attendance data is up. We're held accountable on part of our A through F to have attendance above 94% in every site, and we hover between 96 and 97% now because we really focus on that. Our student engagement is up. Our coaches do some tracking of that on Observation 360 through PD 360. Our graduation data is up, and our behavior data is down. We had a meeting with all of our counselors today to try to figure out how we're going to put a longitudinal system in place to better track behavior and drug problems and all those kinds of things. So remember when I said we'd won just about everything and are known across the state for our prowess in football, basketball, track, golf, tennis. Our high school team actually went for the first time to the Class 4A state academic meet this year, and they won runner-up. So we're extremely proud of that, and gains are gains, and by golly, we'll take them wherever we can. So then versus now, we were 5 tiny islands, just adrift. And who we are now, I sit here in the twilight of my career, and I can tell you I've never been more proud to be associated with such a fine group of people, because we are actually all together now. As I said earlier, we still have some problems that we need to overcome, but none of them are major, and we're working on those. So David's going to talk about the things he sees from his perspective as the Indian Education Director, and talk a little bit more about the Warrior Way.
Okay, before I do go on, would this be a good time to stop for questions or anything before we move on into the latter part of our presentation? Are there any questions?
Sure, David, that's a good idea. For those of you that are on the phone, if you want to hit *6 to unmute your line and ask a question about what you've heard so far, or you can type into the chat box. We'll pause for just a brief second before we continue with the presentation.
Okay, I'm going to take the silence as an indication that we have no questions. So,
good call.
What I'd like to focus on is just focusing on a few things. I don't want to repeat exactly what we've already covered, but from my perspective, what I look at as far as keys to what has made this process so successful has been, of course, we've talked about the quality training, support, and expectation from UVA, but what I like, the fact about it is the accountability that comes with it. It's a different type of accountability. Of course, all districts have accountability, but having an entity like UVA that provides the training, the support, and the expectation, I think that's been a key. And that leads right into the effective implementation of the 90-day plans. Without us having the focus on all from the district level, and then each site has their own 90-day plan, I just don't think it would have worked. And the key factor, and I'm not just saying that because she's here in the room with me, but the key factor for this has been having Mrs. Hackney as our district shepherd, because you have not only the leadership, the instructional leadership focus that she has, but the accountability level is there. It's my understanding that not every superintendent in all of our districts necessarily go out and do the things that we've been doing over the last few years. So I believe that has been one key component, and I'm grateful that I was able to be a part of that process. As mentioned before, I have been a key component, or I have been involved in the district in various ways over the 14 years that I've been involved with the district. But it has been enhanced so much in the last few years, and it's been invaluable to me, and it's made my overall satisfaction with the job just over the top. So I can't say enough on UVA and also our leadership here as far as how that has changed, because I just think, well, I'll get down to that, to how that has played into the overall process. But it goes right into the effective and intentional teamwork. You know, you can have teamwork, but if it's not effective, if it's not intentional, if it's not at all levels, it just won't work. I told our principals this morning when we had our district leadership team this morning, and we went around and provided the booster just something positive. And I never have had a chance to really say what I said this morning, which I said in all the years that I've worked here, I have never worked with a group of people that have cared so much for our students and worked so hard in different ways to make sure that all of our students receive the education that they can. Of course, like we always want to I always feel the need or the necessity to say, now, of course, we're not anywhere near where we need to be, but we have made significant progress. So moving on, high expectations, consistent monitoring, feedback, and accountability, how that has worked, and it's been a very interesting thing to watch how the accountability process mixed in with the high expectations, the monitoring, and that's not just a top-down process. Now you see it at all levels. You see the teachers working with each other, and that's why at the end I put peer pressure can be good. A lot of times growing up we think, well, peer pressure has had a negative connotation, but we've been in PLC meetings where we see teachers bringing along struggling teachers to where they're basically taking them under their wing and saying, come on, let's get this going, let's do this, this is for the good of our students. And we're seeing that. We're seeing various levels in all the sites. Our fourth grade teachers right now, they're a team that they're knocking it out of the park. I mean, these guys have the teamwork that exists within them. And I'm proud to say that we have two of the five, we have 5 teachers in the 4th and 5th grade levels. 2 of those 5 are American Indian teachers. And they are, I mean, if you had been able to see the way that they approached their instructional process before this and see them now, you would be amazed. I'm amazed, and I just can't say enough about that. And so that brings me to the end that the student has truly moved to the center. I feel that at my very core, and I'm so glad to see that, because moving into how this is from the student perspective, you know, you see before, and you'll see you know, we had students that were disengaged, apathetic, externally motivated, disconnected from data, disjointed perspectives, and yes, as mentioned earlier, we're very competitive in athletics. But now we're starting to see some emerging traits, and I say emerging because, you know, we are still in the process of making this turnaround. We've just made the turnaround movement, so now we're moving, and I'm so excited to see where we can go from here, to see how our students are now engaged and excited about certain things. And it's not every day, of course, it's not in every classroom, but we are seeing it. Last week and the week before, we went through our walkthroughs, and you can see the students. When you walk in, you see the students in their centers, and you can see how they're engaged, and they look up and they expect to hear from you. They expect to see you interested in what they're doing, and they'll share with you. And so what I'm seeing is the motivation has now switched to where it's internal. They see the process, and part of that has come through being more data conscious. It's been one thing that I've really wanted to see, and I don't know if Ms. Hackney has ever become tired of me doing this, but when we're talking about it, I always want to make sure that the student is actively engaged in the data tracking, in their making sure that they understand what they're doing. Why are they being involved in this process? Why are we doing all of this? I know myself growing up, I always asked that question. Growing up in this very district, I always asked the question, why do we have to do certain subjects? Math was one of my subjects I really was not very strong in, and I didn't understand it. I didn't understand the full process of why we had all of the different elements that we had to do, but that's why I push. I want to make sure that they understand, that they track their data, that they become systemically literate, and now we're seeing that, and you see the academic crossover, as the previous slide mentioned. Now we're seeing you know, it's exciting. Our students now, our academic team, they're going to Atlanta, Georgia at the end of this month for a national competition. It's not connected with OSSBA activities, but it's something that it's a first for our district, and we're excited to see that. So just going back into the Warrior Way and what I think, you know, I wanted to make sure that I focused on our students. What are we seeing in the classroom? What are we seeing that's going on individually with each student? And I believe the Warrior Way embodies this component. You see that we are seeing students are becoming they're having self-awareness become fostered by our people. Personal growth, limited concern with others' opinions, interest in fulfilling their potential, fostering individual self-esteem, personal worth, social recognition and accomplishment, the relationship. I was able to present at one of our, back when we used to have an annual gathering at the beginning of the year, I presented on cultural awareness and to our whole district, and it was in our auditorium. And this was one of the focuses that I only had 2 points. I said be relational with our students and be intentional. And so to me, if you can get that middle point, building that relationship, and I see it. I see it when we were at one of our elementary schools, you can see our students coming up and they look at us and they know who we are. They'll come, that wasn't the case a few years ago. They didn't know me. Some of them still don't. But when you have 1,400 students, you can't always know them, but I guarantee you I know more than I did prior to this process, and it's in various fashions. The relationship process is a key, and so I won't go through the bottom 2 slides, but those 2 components are very it's vital for the Warrior Way, and that's where, you know, we talked about it. The concept or the term Warrior Way developed out of our initial planning. I'm trying to decide what is going to help generate and unite all of us. And this was something that came up, and I believe it kind of generated from someone in the high school, and we continue to develop it. So people, all of our staff, the site leadership, they began to take this on, and our students begin to take it on. And so now that you hear that, when a student is, maybe they're not on the right side of the hallway, they'll say, you know, you can hear them, hey, that's not the Warrior Way. We don't only hear the teachers, now we hear students saying, reminding other students, the Warrior Way is you get on this side of the hallway, and this is how we're expected to act. This is how we do. So a lot of what you see here, you might, if you're a psychology junkie like I am in some ways, you'll see this is more of a self-actualization component based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which, you know, a lot of the current research talks about how, I know Maslow, he wanted to focus mostly on how this is a hierarchy and you have to focus on the individual student, their basic needs, and then go on from there to the top. But current research really indicates that all of these are important and vital at the same time. And so that's what I believe that's what's important for our students. And I'm glad to see that the Warrior Way has grown, not only in our school, but now it's in our town. Our people in our community are picking it up. We see banners down in our downtown area that have the Warrior Way on them all through our town. So we're proud of that. We're proud that we see that. So where we go from here, I want to try to wrap it up because I'm watching the clock and I realize that we want to have time for questions at the end. But this quote here, I wish I could say his name, and if anyone does, Jacob, if you know how to say the name, then I would welcome that. But when you begin a great work, you can't expect to finish it all at once. So therefore, you have to press on. Let nothing discourage you until you have entirely finished what you have begun. And this is, I've had this quote on my computer for several years, and I thought what a great time to be able to pull this out and share that with everyone, because this is truly what it is. As Mrs. Hackney mentioned, I know in some of our discussions we've talked about, it's kind of like building a house. You have systems that you have to put in place. You have to have the foundation, And then all of those things, all of the things that we talked about in previous slides that William talked about, those have to be in place in order for the Warrior Way to happen. And so I'm really glad that we have that. So now just to give you a few, last year we had 5 academic scholars, Oklahoma academic scholars in our 2014 class. That was the first time that we had anything like that. This year I think we have 3, maybe 4. And so we're glad to be able to see that. If you'll notice in the back, you see the banner or the Warrior Way slide, and you see the students that have committed to those universities there. You can see that their pictures there. So that's one other piece that we're trying to get it in front of them and let them see that students are going places, and you can too. And this is just one thing that I want to focus on as we move into the future. This year is the first year that we've had an elementary culture class that for all of our third grade students. All of our third grade students attend these sessions. It's part of their special rotation. So one day, instead of them going to PE or music, they go to this class. And so it's a pilot project that we started. Our East Elementary principal asked for this last year, and so we put it in place. And so now we're looking at, I'm really excited and anticipating that we're going to see some good data. We're going to be able to gain some good data from this. And hopefully, if it works and we see something that would be significant and it works within our structure of our other buildings, we hope to expand that and make that an option for our students at all the elementary sites. But we're still in the beginning stages of that. But those are some exciting things that we're working on for the future as we move from where we were to where we are now. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Mrs. Hackney as she talks about some of the resources.
When we were at all of our trainings with the University of Virginia, they brought in Paul Bambrick Santoyo, and you can see his 2 books here that they relied heavily on, and we brought those back to the district and used them as book studies with the instructional coaches, the principals, the teacher leaders, and all of the teachers in the buildings. And one thing that I do want to say that wasn't on any of the slides, how important David and my special services director are to this process and our district 90-day action plan. Every Friday afternoon at 1 o'clock, David and Joanna come to my office, and we talk about the site visits that we've made and what we've seen and what are some things that we didn't see, and that's what drives our agenda for Monday morning when we have our district level PLCs. And I want you to know that, yes, I've got 1,932 students and 243 staff members, and I still have to do finance, and I still have to do a lot of other things that a lot of superintendents do. And again, without David and Joanna's support, I don't think we would have been near as far as we are. I tell them all the time, they've just been a godsend to me and the kids in this district to allow us to get to where we are. But these are 2 of the resources that we've relied on heavily. I would very strongly urge, if you've never heard of Paul Bambrick Santoyo, to go on the internet and do some research on him and look for these books. And one other book that we got when we were at one of our retreats was Cage Busting Leadership by Frederick Hess. And chapter 1 is all about it doesn't have to be this hard, and tells you to stop rolling that boulder up the hill and picking fights. And the part that we assigned chapters and reported out on them, and the thing that we liked in chapter 2 was really seeing things differently. And these are things when I talked about all the slides at the beginning of change, the culture of can't, get that out of there. The platitudes trap, the sucks less trap. Well, let's do this because it sucks less than that. The more better trap. If we just had more of this, we could be better at this. The MacGyver trap, let's get some duct tape and see what we can do with it, and the one more thing on my plate. And the reason I've got the last part of chapter 2 in red is a little help from my friends, because honestly, this has been extremely rewarding work, but it's also been a challenge, and without a little help from the friends, which I consider to be all of the principals and the instructional coaches and David and Joanna, we certainly wouldn't be where we are right now. And just a couple of things that I could share with you if you are so inclined to know. We do have a set of district expectations. There are 6 of them, and they're fairly clearly defined. The second bullet is district expectations monitoring protocol. It's actually a PDF form that we've created that goes along with our district expectations. And when we send the principals back feedback from whether we've been out in the classrooms or to PLC, they get written feedback from us on this district monitoring protocol. One of the things they said was they wanted more feedback. I think they probably rue the day they said that, but they get a lot of feedback from us now, trying to support them. I can send you what our district leadership team meeting agendas look like. We also created team norms for our district leadership meetings that we have here every Monday. Our actual 90-day next step district action plan, I'd be more than glad to share that with anybody, and how we created and a copy of our district assessment calendar. We've got lots of other documents, and the University of Virginia has encouraged us, and I've started it, to make an online library of all the resources that we've created here in the district and are taken from other people and have adapted for our own, because, you know, nothing's ever original in education, but we'd be more than glad to share anything we've got with anybody. Again, we're still a little bit overwhelmed and humbled that people want to talk to us about our work. So to sum up, it is all about the Warrior Way every day, and we truly mean that. We live it, eat it, breathe it, the whole 9 yards. We have it on our T-shirts. As David said, it's on the banners downtown. One of our local banks donated a marquee to us. It's on our website, on our district Facebook page, on our newly refinished gym floor, and but most importantly, it's in our classrooms every day, and I attribute the Warrior Way to coming up with the partnership with the University of Virginia. So, again, thank you so much for allowing us this time to share the story about our kids. I've told everybody, and I said this earlier, I'm in the twilight of my career, and I'm out to prove to everybody that our kids in Anadarko are just as good or better than any other kids across the state and this country. So if you have any questions or would like any information from either David or me, please feel free to reach out to us. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cindy and David. Before we open up for questions, and I'm seeing some already coming into the chat box, that's wonderful. Keep doing those. I also know some of you are thinking about questions that you have, so get ready to do *6 to unmute yourselves. But before we do that, just to get our thinking activated, you've heard about several different research-based strategies and emerging best practices that are happening in Anadarko. And we're interested to have you tell us which of these topics that have been presented would you like to know more about, either today or in the future. You can mark more than one of those on the poll, so feel free to click on 2 or 3 of them if there's things that are really interesting to you that you want to know more about. And as you're doing that, we'll go ahead and queue up the questions that are coming in the chat box. So again, I'll give you a moment to fill out that poll before we close it, but I'll go ahead and read for Cindy and David a question that came in from Heather. She said, the need for district-level support of turnaround schools is so critical. What were the key steps in beginning this effort? She said she'd also love to have access to some of the materials that you mentioned, as focus and priority schools in South Dakota could really benefit from seeing how this can work. So thank you, Anadarko, very inspiring information, but would love to get an answer to that question. Cindy and David, what would you say were the key steps in beginning your effort?
Well, frankly, it was part of the University of Virginia. We would have done something, even if you, Carrie, and the other people at the State Department hadn't invited me up there over that one Christmas break. And I knew we needed to do something different because I'd been here for so long in so many different roles. But honestly, for us, it was just simply that we had no choice. we had to do something different, and it had to be radically different, and it had to come from up here because I followed a great superintendent, and but we didn't have any accountability really as a team, and that was the one thing that I feel like is what we had to do. We've also watched this process with other districts that don't have the superintendent involved, and I understand if you're a very large school district, that might be extremely hard to do, but again, you just find the time for what you think is the most important. I'm probably not doing a really good job of answering this question, but I think I was probably the one that decided we were going to do this after talking to David and Joanna and the building principals and making sure that the school board was on, on with us. But I just think it's critical that the district level supports, and it not only supports, but understands the process, because it is arduous and it takes a while and it is all about change, and not everyone's comfortable with that.
Cindy, we have a question here in the room.
Hi, Cindy, David, this is Belinda. First, let me say thank you. That was amazing, wonderful. I could listen to what you have to share all day long. But I did have a question for you, David. Again, I am very intrigued by the fact that Cindy, as superintendent, made you a key partner of the leadership team. That typically doesn't happen based on my experiences in most districts. Could you share a little bit more about that expanded role that you took on in terms of what outreach did you do with parents and the community, and how did you begin to expand that traditional role of Indian Education Coordinator to embrace more of this school improvement and turnaround effort? I'm curious about what that looked like.
Well, it's really, it's been a very natural progress or progression. It's almost hard to describe how exactly it happened. I just know that as we began year one and we started the implementation process, it took me, I would say, up to the middle part of the first year to really get a good handle on what exactly my role was within the process. As we were able to attend the sessions in Albuquerque, mid-year sessions, and we were able to see more of the 4 leadership levers, how those worked within the system, how we could use that. That helped me to begin focusing. I know that back in, I would say, it would be the second district 90-day action plan that we put together. I remember the first one, Mrs. Hackney was a little more involved because we were still in the beginning stages, but in the second one, she allowed myself and Ms. Hudson to be more involved within that process, and we were able to get more of a grasp on the 4 key leadership levers. And to me, that's where I think my perspective as an American Indian person to me, the systemic process really gelled with me more, because I think the way that a lot of our tribal people, not everybody, but a lot of our tribal people think in that terms. They think in terms of the whole rather than in categorical ways of thinking, which is what a lot of our educational systems are geared for. I mean, if you look back at Western European culture and concept, and especially how it developed historically in the American educational system, you see the compartmentalization process was designed and placed within it. You said earlier how a lot of the programs were siloed, how everything was, everybody did their thing, but there was no communication. And so the systemic process was really, to me, it spoke to me, and I jumped on it, and like I said earlier, some of those things, that's what I really pushed. I wanted to see more systemic processes in there, understanding, and I know Mrs. Hackney thinks that way as well, because she jumped right on it, and everything, the teamwork process, like I hopefully I communicated that well enough in the other slide, but the teamwork process was vital, and it continues to be vital to where everyone works together. Now, as far as the community and how I began to communicate that, for me, it initially started with our
David and Cindy, we appear to be having a little technical difficulty. We're suddenly not able to hear you very clearly.
Uh-oh.
Can you hear me?
Is that any better?
It is, yes.
Better.
I don't know what happened.
David, thank you so much. I love that response, which only makes me have a second question. As you talk about silos, I wonder, Cindy, if you and David could share a little bit as you began to break down some of those silos. I love the picture with the islands and bringing all the islands together. How did you begin to break down those silos, for example, between Title I and Indian education, with everybody's fears around their pots of money and losing control over that? How have you managed to kind of create some new practices around how things are done, especially across some of the siloed federal money?
Well, we don't really have a whole lot of problem with that. We may be unique, I don't know, but all of our sites are school-wide sites, so none of them are targeted assistants. And our Title I money goes to pay our instructional coaches and our paraprofessionals, and our principals and teachers love our instructional coaches and paraprofessionals, so that's not a problem. And David and I work so closely together. As a matter of fact, we were trying to figure out how we were going to fund the kids to go to Atlanta at the end of the month for the academic meet, and I knew that some of the kids that were going were Native American, and asked David, do you have any extra money? So that's just kind of how we do things. I've not ever looked at the money as being anything but all of our money and trying. And, you know, when we had our first conversation, Dr. Bisco, and I don't know if this is going to help anybody or not, but, you know, when you ask specifically what we do for our Native American students, and David and I talk about this a lot. When the majority of your kids are Native American and you do research on what the best practices are for all children, whether they're children of poverty, if they're Native American children, whatever their ethnicity or, you know, socioeconomic status is, there's research out there that shows what best practices are. And so we've just made a conscientious effort to take all of our funding, whether it's state or local, federal funding, and put it to the best use of the kids. And me being the district shepherd and being the superintendent, and David overseeing Indian Ed and Joanne overseeing special services, my assistant superintendent doing the federal programs, it's not been an issue. We've just made it work however we could.
Great. Thank you so much. Great story.
I think it's interesting, David, that you mentioned the systemic approach of being something that really spoke to you. And that's when we did our poll just a moment ago, that was the area that we had the most people say that they would like to learn more about how do you get away from being individual islands. So thank you so much for sharing all of that today. We do have just a few minutes that would love to hear if there are other districts or schools that you are working with in your part of the country that maybe have some similar experiences that you would be interested in sharing. Or if you have another question or comment for Cindy, David, or William, we'll allow that too. So just a couple more minutes for discussion before we wrap up with our closing thoughts. While you're thinking, yes.
Carrie, since no one has a question, just William, I just want to go back to the first question about a first step, and Cindy talked about the importance of systemic. Just to help actualize that, one thing that we're seeing some of the best approaches to turnaround take is to ensure that all district leaders, as well as leaders from other campuses, are on the campuses that are going to turn around, conducting a needs assessment together, getting the perspective of the teachers, of the students, of the community, together. Often when we do needs assessments in education, it's an outside entity coming in, or it's a very specific instructional audit that doesn't get at the true perspectives of those doing the work and what they believe change is going to take. Whether or not their advice is followed to a T, knowing their perspective, valuing their advice, engaging with it to develop the solutions is necessary, and often the first step is a structured process to do a needs assessment systemically together.
Thank you. That's a really good point, William. Just as we're wrapping up, by way of closure, want to draw your attention to the contact information that is available to you on the screen. Heather, I know that you had requested some of those resources that Cindy mentioned, and we will be sure to connect you with Cindy via email to get those. And anyone else, if you would like any of those resources, feel free to reach out to us here at the South Central Comprehensive Center, or to contact Cindy directly. That's why you have all of our contact information. I, again, just want to thank you very much for your participation today. Taking the ideas from research that we know to be good practice and learning about where they are happening across the country in the real world, hearing that real story puts the meat on the bones, so to speak, and gives us that real world example of what is possible. As we are doing our planning for the future and what additional information to share with those of you who are participating with us today, as well as others across the country that are interested in American Indian education topics, we would really value your feedback. I've posted into the chat box a link that will take you to a survey. So instead of redirecting you at the end of the webinar, just ask that you would click on that link that's in the chat box and go to the survey directly so that you can share your feedback with us about today's presentation. We really do thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to continuing to think with you about good practice for our American Indian students.
And again, thanks to William, Cindy, and David. We really appreciate what you've shared. It's been fabulous.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just very quickly, there was another question that came in. Want to let everyone know that we will share the link to the archive of this webinar, so you can listen to the whole thing if you didn't get on from the very beginning. So this will all be available through the South Central Comprehensive Center's website, and we'll send that link out to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.